Welcome back. Remember last time we were talking about Alexander the Great? What's important for us today is his death. Let me recap a little bit. You'll remember that Alexander died in Babylon, and the body was eventually being brought to Greece for burial, but it was hijacked. It was hijacked by his general, Ptolemy, and brought to Egypt. Ptolemy wanted to bury Alexander in Egypt. Now, Ptolemy is going to found a dynasty. It's called the Ptolemaic dynasty. Every king is named Ptolemy. So if you ever want to sort of answer the question, what were they doing in the Greek period? Who did it? The answer is Ptolemy, always. There were 15 Ptolemies. And I think most Egyptologists and classicists would agree with me when I oversimplify, but it's pretty accurate. The early Ptolemies, the first 2 or 3 were the good Ptolemies, and after that, they were all bad apples. It goes downhill. We're going to talk about the first Ptolemy today. Now, also I should say something about the women, the queens. There's only one name for the kings, Ptolemy. That's easy. And the queens are pretty easy also. They only have 3 names. And you remember them by ABC. Arsinoe is one name, Bernike, which we get our Bernice from, and Cleopatra. So all the queens are either Arsinoe, Bernike, or Cleopatra. So it's easy to remember that also. But let's talk about Ptolemy the First. We know something about his personality. You can get a feeling for the man. Remember that Macedonia was a kind of rural area. It was a little bit rough around the edges. And people from Macedonia weren't considered cultured. Athens is where it was happening. This is where Greek philosophy blossomed. This is where you have Plato, Aristotle, right? But Alexander the Great, even though he came from Macedonia, was an educated military man. The tradition is that Alexander was educated by Aristotle. When he went on military campaigns, he sent back specimens, birds, things like that, for his teacher. So Alexander starts this tradition of a military man who is cultured, educated. Ptolemy continues it. He's not just a military man. He is cultured, and he's going to do great things. Now, what kind of great things is he going to do? He's going to do Greek great things. He's going to do things that no Egyptian ever would have thought of. But they're fabulous. But they're going to be done in the Greek style. First, he builds the famous library at Alexandria. Now, there's a tremendous mystery about the library. Where was it? Where is it? There is no trace at all of the library at Alexandria. I think it may have been built on the water by the Mediterranean. It's certainly in Alexandria. And perhaps it fell into the sea. The Mediterranean has been washing away the coast of Alexandria for thousands of years, and it could be under the water. We're not sure, but no traces remain of the library. But we have plenty of contemporary accounts. Now let me say something about this library. It is a milestone in the history of the intellectual world. There was nothing like it in history until Ptolemy the First builds it. It is the first think tank in the history of the world. Before Ptolemy, every scientist, every scholar worked independently. If you were an astronomer, you did your observations, maybe you had an assistant, but you were working alone. Ptolemy's idea was to build a place where scholars could come together and interchange ideas. This is a Greek idea. The Greeks are always looking forward, looking out. Egyptians never would have thought of, hey, come to Egypt, hang out with us. No, Egypt was always isolationist. They had the desert on 2 sides, the cataracts in the south, all isolating them. And in the north they had the Mediterranean, which they didn't sail. So Egypt always tended to be insular. For example, Ptolemy's building this library for everybody. In Egypt, there were libraries in the temples. And there was a title. And the title was Overseer of the Secrets. That was the librarian. This wasn't open to everybody. This was only for the priests. The library was secret. It was supposed to be kept away from the public. It's the same with Egyptian religion. Secret, not open. You were never supposed to go to the temple. There was no time in ancient Egypt, no day of the week, when you were supposed to go and pray. There was no Friday, as in the Muslim religion, Saturday, as in the Jewish religion, Sunday, as in the Christian religion. There was no day when the masses were supposed to go and worship. That was the job of the priests. The temples in Egypt had big enclosure walls. It was secret. It was separate. Ptolemy is opening it all up. So he builds the library. Now, what is the library like? Well, first, according to one tradition, there were 700,000 books. 700,000 books. Now, it's a very, very large number. It's certainly too large. There were not that many works written. There may have been multiple copies, we're not sure. And of course, books, as they're called, is not the right term. It's probably papyrus scrolls. Everything's written on papyrus, and we don't have pages yet. They roll it up. But 700,000 works in this library. There was a separate room just for the works of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, all the different editions. We even know one of the librarians' names, Callimachus. And he made a catalog, right? Like the card catalog, the precursor of the card catalog. The catalog itself was 120 scrolls. So this was an incredible, incredible operation. And it was open to everybody. Now, in addition to the library, don't think of it just as a place with scrolls. Don't. There were other buildings. It was a complex. And the idea was that scholars, even scientists, could come here and live free, paid for by Ptolemy. He was going to bring them here. There were dorms. There were cafeterias, all paid for by the state so that knowledge would go forward. An amazing thing. We get the word museum in English from the library at Alexandria. It was the place of the 9 muses. In Greek mythology, there were 9 goddesses who were in charge of the arts and sciences. And the library was the place of the muses, the museum. So that's where we get our word from this line. So it was everything. I mean, it was a fabulous place. Now, what takes place here? History. Euclid wrote his geometry while he was at the library at Alexandria. Eratosthenes figures out the circumference of the earth. He does an experiment. While he's at the library, he sees he has 2 poles, one at the library in Alexandria, one all the way down south at Aswan, and depending upon the shadows that the poles cast, he computes the circumference of the earth. Now, I don't know if you're old enough, but I'm old enough to have been taught in school that Columbus is the one who proves that the earth is round. That when Columbus sailed, he sails around the earth, and that proves that the earth is round. And before Columbus, everybody thought it was flat. No. Eratosthenes certainly knew. And if you read your Plato, in one of his dialogues, the Phaedo, at the end, he has Socrates saying, and everybody knows the earth is a sphere suspended in the heavens. So educated people knew that the earth was round. And Eratosthenes, working at the library, figures out the circumference. And, if you want further proof that everybody knew that the earth was round, think about the Middle Ages. The symbol of the church, the dominion of the church over the earth, was a cross on top of an orb. It's not on top of a pancake, it's on top of a globe. So people knew that the earth was round. And Eratosthenes figured out the circumference. Incredible achievement. Other famous scientists worked there. Herophilus figures out, first one ever to say this, that the seat of all thought is the brain. Before Herophilus, the belief was, and it's an Egyptian belief, that you thought with your heart. Now that's not crazy, because if you think about it, when you get excited, it's your heart that starts beating quickly, not your brain. This is why on Valentine's Day, we send little chocolate hearts, not little chocolate brains, right? a deep-seated belief that it's your heart that does it. But Herophilus says, no, it's the brain. Another one who was at the library, Hero of Alexandria, an engineer. Hero invents the steam engine. He boils water and has the steam move mechanical objects. So, for example, there were fabulous things. If you gave an offering at a temple, if Hero had designed some of the things, the god could bow to you as you gave the offering. He could have doors opening up automatically, propelled by steam. So great things happen at the library. And it's all due to Ptolemy, a Greek idea. Ptolemy has another name. Right? He has another name. I mean, you can't have 15 Ptolemies, everybody with the same name. You're in trouble. You say Ptolemy and everybody turns around. Ptolemy's other name is Soter, S-O-T-E-R. It means savior. Savior. When the island of Rhodes was besieged by another of Alexander's generals, Ptolemy saved them. And they gave him the title, Savior. So everything we know about Ptolemy here in the beginning is positive. He is a man who cares about good works, right? Cares about good works. He also keeps his allegiance to Alexander the Great and the memory of Alexander. When he is given Egypt to rule, he does not declare himself king or pharaoh. No. The reason is there are two other relations of Alexander who are alive. And Ptolemy feels Alexander was so great that these relations perhaps should be king of Egypt. One is a half-brother of Alexander, Philip III, who is retarded. He's retarded. But even though he's retarded, Ptolemy will not declare himself king, and Ptolemy even builds a monument for Philip Aridaeus III in Egypt, for this retarded boy, just because he's Alexander's half-brother. There is another possible ruler for Egypt. Alexander had married a Bactrian woman, Roxanne. And when Alexander died in Babylon, Roxanne was pregnant. And she gave birth to Alexander's posthumous son, Alexander IV. And the possibility is that this boy will grow up and be a great leader. So Ptolemy will not take the title of king. Now, what happens to these children? Alexander's mother, Olympia, has Philip III assassinated so that her grandson, Alexander IV, might rule Egypt. But the plan doesn't work. Roxanne and Alexander IV are both assassinated also. So we have the children who might take over, who are related to Alexander, being killed, and then and only then is Ptolemy willing to say, okay, I will become king. Now, very interesting way he becomes king. You remember the Egyptian tradition is that you become king by marrying the right woman. You marry the woman with the pure royal blood, and then you become king. Ptolemy I takes a wife. This woman is the daughter of Nectanebo II, who is the last native ruler of Egypt who had to flee. Supposedly, remember, he fled to the Macedonian court. But for sure, Ptolemy marries his daughter, right? And that's how he becomes king. It's a kind of legitimacy. The Greeks have this reverence for Egypt, and he is becoming king in a legitimate way. So Ptolemy is a person we can understand. He cares about Alexander. He has a bit of a reverence for Egypt. And he's doing public works. He's building a library. And then he has another public work. That's one of the 7 wonders of the world. He builds the lighthouse at Alexandria. This is the only of the 7 wonders of the world, the only one that was for a secular purpose. No religious connotation at all. He builds the lighthouse so that trade can come in to Alexandria. The lighthouse was built just outside the port on an island called Pharaohs Island. Now, it's not Pharaohs apostrophe S, not Pharaohs Island. It's Pharaohs, Pharaos, sometimes OS. It may be related to that, we're not sure, but it was always called Pharaohs Island. And on the island, he builds a lighthouse that has first a square base, then there's another stage, it's octagonal, and then there's another stage, it's circular. So it's a three-stage lighthouse going up about 420 feet in height. Interesting, by the way, it's almost the same height as the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was 480 at its peak. And these are the two seven wonders of the world that are in Egypt. There are two of the seven wonders in Egypt, and the lighthouse is one. The lighthouse must have been an incredible engineering marvel. At the top, a fire was kept burning 24 hours a day. And behind it was a bronze mirror, a curved bronze mirror, which could slide on a groove 180 degrees. So you could angle the light, shine it out wherever you wanted. The light could be seen 30 miles out to guide ships into the port. It was a fabulous thing, and it was in operation until 1303. An earthquake did it in. It crumbled during an earthquake. Shortly after 1303, a traveler, a famous world traveler, Ibn Battuta, visited it. And he said he saw it, but he couldn't go up in the lighthouse because it was damaged, terribly damaged. So up until 1303, this was a functioning lighthouse guiding ships in. Now, how many ships? 1,200 ships could fit in the harbor at Alexandria. This was a major shipping enterprise. And this is pure Greek, pure Greek. Egyptians never would have thought of, oh, let's get lots of ships coming in and out. They would have controlled everything. But this is just an amazing thing, and Ptolemy is doing it all. Now, the two things, the two big works projects, the library and the lighthouse, are really Greek in concept. They're looking outward. They're open. They're not secretive. First point on Ptolemy, he does great things, but he's doing Greek things. Second point on Ptolemy, he is going to run Egypt like a business. He is a Greek, and he's coming in as a ruler, and he wants to run it efficiently. He wants to run Egypt efficiently. So he is going to do things that a businessman might do. That a businessman might do. First, he needs a bureaucracy. You need, if you're going to do business, if you're going to have lots of grain coming in and out, if you're going to tax the people, you need people who can read and write. So to some extent, he supports the priests. Not for any deep religious reason. No. The priests are the literate class who can read and write, and he's going to need them. So he does certain things that please the priests. He builds temples, Egyptian temples. And if you want to see the best preserved temples in Egypt, look at the Ptolemaic temples. They're the most recent ones, but they're the best preserved, and they're also some of the largest. And they're built by Ptolemy I, Ptolemy II, and later Ptolemies to appease the priests. So he's, you know, it's like any business. If you got happy workers, you're going to get a better product. And he's going to try to keep the priests happy. So he builds temples. But there is also taxation. He is going to take his cut of almost everything. One thing they tax, that's the biggest source of income, is the grain. Egypt, as you know, always grew more crops than it needed, and he takes his cut. The method of taxation is interesting. How much could you grow during a year? How much could an acre of land produce? Well, it depended on how high the Nile rose. If you had a good Nile, rising way up, irrigating a lot of land, depositing lots of topsoil, you could grow plenty of crops. But in a year when there was a very, very poor Nile, when it was low, very little water, couldn't grow much. The Ptolemies put in what are called nilometers, Nile measurers. These are cut into the rock right next to the water with measurements. And when the Nile overflowed, it would come up, and this would measure how high the Nile was. So every year, the Ptolemies kept records of how high the Nile was. Now, you are taxed not on how much you grow. You're taxed on how much you should be able to grow. They would calculate, okay, it was a high Nile, you should be able to get 1,000 bushels. Now, if you don't get your 1,000 bushels, tough on you. You're going to take that 10% no matter what. You've got to cough up your 100 bushels. If you only got 500 bushels, you're still coughing up 100 bushels. So it's how much you should be able to grow, not how much you actually grew. Now look, it's an interesting businessman's concept. There's an incentive there to really work hard. What if you should be able to grow 1,000 bushels, come up with 1,000 bushels, but you work really hard, you get your friends to help you, and you come up with 1,500 bushels. You keep the extra 500. So they are making sure that they get a maximal return for their investment. So they are taxing, but they are doing it in an intelligent way. What else do they tax? Papyrus. Now, remember, the Egyptians invent papyrus. It is the origin of our word paper, comes from papyrus. And papyrus was a reed that grew along the Nile, wild, didn't have to be cultivated. And it's about the same size as bamboo, right? Think of it as bamboo, about the same thickness. And what you did to make papyrus, paper, was you sliced the center of it so that you would have a thin oblong, maybe 18 inches long. And you sliced hundreds of these. And then you could take your papyrus strip and overlap it with the next strip, with the next strip, with the next strip. And then you beat it with a wooden mallet so that the sap comes out, it glues itself together. The sap of the papyrus plant glues itself to the next piece, to the next piece, to the next piece. And you could make a papyrus scroll as long as you wanted. There was a little bit of work involved. It's not quite that easy. Once you had glued it together, pounded it, dried it, you had to burnish it, polish it, because it's a rough surface. So you have to polish it, make it really smooth, and then you would write on it with a brush. The Egyptians always wrote with a brush, a reed brush. They would take a reed from the river and chew it and make it kind of bristly, dip it in the ink, and then you could write. Now, papyrus was a fabulous invention, because before that, everybody wrote in clay, right? You had cuneiform, the Sumerians, doing their little stylus on a tablet. This is so much easier. You could store things easier, you could ship it. So papyrus was really a big export, and the Ptolemies had a monopoly on it. They controlled the whole industry. But that wasn't the only industry. They controlled emeralds and gold. Now, Egypt did not have precious stones until the emerald mines were discovered on the Red Sea. There were never any diamonds, rubies, emeralds. Semi-precious stones, yes. But there are no, you often hear it, for example, in Tutankhamun's tomb, people say, the gold mask was inlaid with precious stones. No, there are no precious stones in Egypt. It's semi-precious. But they discovered emerald mines, and they sent prisoners to the mines to extract the emeralds. Gold also. They controlled that trade. Another interesting industry that they really took complete control of was banking. All transactions, they took their cut. I mean, remember, these are businessmen running Egypt as a business. They introduced coinage into Egypt. Before then, everything was a matter of barter. I'll trade you some grain, you give me the cattle, you do this. But now they have coins. And that makes things easier, a lot easier. Coins, by the way, that have the head of Alexander the Great on them, right? So we've got the Ptolemies doing trade, they're doing pretty well. But they never really fit in with the Egyptians. They lived at Alexandria. The Ptolemies never mingled with the people. Alexandria was called, in their time, the city. The rest to the south was Egypt. So it was Egypt versus the city. All the Greeks lived in Alexandria, and there were 300,000 of them. living in Alexandria. Administrative center of Egypt became Alexandria. In the south of Alexandria, it's all agrarian. You have the Egyptians, about 7 million of them. Now, if you were an Egyptian who wanted to rise quickly, you wanted to do well in government or something like that, you had to learn Greek. That became the language of trade, right? So during the time of Ptolemy, we have a history of Egypt written by an Egyptian priest named Manetho, called Egyptiaca. Now that's the Greek for Egypt, Egyptiaca. He is an Egyptian priest writing in Greek so that the Ptolemies can read about the history of the country they govern. And this is a book that is placed inside the library at Alexandria. Now, there are all kinds of stories of the Ptolemies doing this, doing that. But what is clear is they did great things, but in a Greek way. Now, Ptolemy I, a good Ptolemy, is succeeded by another good Ptolemy. And you know who he is, Ptolemy II, right? He has, of course, another second name. He's not Soter, Savior. He's Philadelphus. He is brother lover, right? Name means brother lover. And he does some interesting things. He increases the land that's cultivatable. He drains some swamps in the area called the Fayum so that there is even more land for more grain. Now, what is he going to do with the grain? He's going to sell it. They've got the port, they've got the lighthouse, they've got the bureaucracy for keeping track. They are going to grow as much as they can and export. They are going to export. He also, Ptolemy II, continues the library at Alexandria. Continues it. And let me give you an idea of how into culture these guys were, these early Ptolemies. He commissions a translation of the Hebrew Bible called the Septuagint, the 70. Now it's called the 70 because supposedly he had 70 rabbis come to translate the Bible, and their translations all agreed, and that became the Septuagint Bible. He wants to know about other people's religion. He is not an isolationist. He wants virtually every book in the world in his library. Ptolemy II is pushing ahead this Ptolemaic project of the library. To show you just as an illustration of just how into books these people were, there was a law in Alexandria that when any ship came into the port, it was searched for books, for papyri. And if the library at Alexandria didn't have that book, it was taken off the ship, brought to the library, and a scribe would copy it. So the library would have it. But wait, it gets better. And then the copy was given back to the ship, and the library kept the original. So they were really after the best copy. I mean, they were the first book collectors. They were after the best copy, the best edition they could find. Now, Ptolemy II marries his sister. This is a tradition that all the Ptolemies will continue. They will marry their sisters, and it's really for two reasons. The first is there is an Egyptian tradition of kings marrying their sisters if necessary to keep the power in the family. There is even a legend, which we'll talk about next time, of Isis and Osiris, who are brother and sister, husband and wife, who found Egypt. And we'll talk about that next time. So by marrying his sister, in a sense, it's an Egyptian tradition that he's continuing. But the other reason is he's Greek, and his sister is a Greek, and they are going to stay together as Greeks. Almost continuously, for the next 300 years, the Ptolemies will intermarry, Greeks marrying Greeks, and they will run the country like a business. Next time, we're going to talk about the last Ptolemy, the famous Cleopatra, and she will end Egyptian civilization. See you then.